Good evening. I'm Stan Best, and I'm very honored to be with you this evening as we celebrate the life of John Merrick, one of Sampson County's most illustrious sons. I put together a very brief biography, and please accept my humble submission. On September 7th, 1859, one of North Carolina's most illustrious sons, John Merrick, is thought to have been born to an enslaved teenage mother in southern Sampson County in the Taylor's Bridge Township section. John Merrick never wrote a formal biography. Consequently, much of his early life is shrouded in mystery. We only have the memories of family and acquaintances to rely on. R. McCants Andrews, a previous biographer, had written that John and his mother, Margaret, moved to Chapel Hill before he was 12 years old. However, the 1870 census reveals that he and his family were in Raleigh as recent as 1869, living with John's uncle by marriage, Henry Jones, a local brick mason. At about the time construction began on Esty Hall on the campus of Shaw University, it is presumed that young John found employment opportunities there, helping to lay bricks. In 1875, John Merrick began work at W.G. Otey's barbershop, located in the basement of the palatial and elegant Yarborough House Hotel. John started as a bootblack and worked his way up to barber. John Wright was the supervisor at Otey's and grew quite fond of young Merrick, for he was honest and upright. John Merrick married Martha Hunter on December 10th, 1879 in Raleigh. They would have 5 children: Geneva, Mabel Violet, Edward Richard, John Thena, and Martha. In the early 1880s, John Wright was recruited to come to Durham and go into business by Washington Duke and others. Wright did not want to be separated from his friend Merrick, so he persuaded him to move to Durham. Their joint venture proved successful as well as profitable. Time passed, and John Wright sold his interest to Merrick and relocated to Washington, D.C. Thus, Merrick and Wright Barbershop became the old reliable barbershop. By the end of the decade, John Merrick would own 5 barbershops in Raleigh and Durham, with 3 catering to white customers and 2 that catered to black clientele. Besides John Merrick's early entrepreneurial ventures, which included investing the profits from his barbershops to construct rental homes using lumber from old tobacco barns that Washington Duke had contracted him to remove, he did much to improve life for Durham's African-American community. 91-year-old Ernest Seaman in 1976 described John Merrick as a very handsome, well-dressed, with a great speaking voice. All of Durham's rich white elite came to John Merrick's chair. They wouldn't think of having anybody else shave them except John. John Merrick had limited formal education. The barbershop would be his university. His professors were his clients and leading businessmen of Durham. One happened to be Washington Duke, who would make John Merrick his personal barber and the object of much benefaction. In 1883, Merrick, with other leaders in Durham, launched a fraternal insurance association called the Royal Knights of King David, where members pooled their resources for everything from funeral expenses to accidents. This organization would be the forerunner to the Mutual Life Insurance Provident Association. It had its philosophical roots in the late 18th century with the Free Africa Society. John Merrick would purchase the interests of its originators, and at the time of his death would be the only one active in the affairs of the association. He was the supreme grand treasurer of the association from beginning to end. On October 20th, 1898, the North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Provident Association was organized by John Merrick and 6 other investors in the office of Dr. Aaron McDuffie Moore. The company was incorporated on February 1899 and opened for business 2 months later, and would be the largest black-owned business in the world. Merrick served as the first president and is generally acknowledged as the founder. In 1919, the company would change its name to North Carolina Mutual Life. The Lincoln Hospital was established in 1901 and was the brainchild of Dr. A.M. Moore. But John Merrick's sway over the Dukes was essential in securing the funding. John Merrick would be appointed the hospital's initial president of board of directors. On February 15, 1907, the Mechanics and Farmers Bank of Durham was incorporated. It was an outgrowth of the North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company. It had a tremendous effect on the African American community in Durham by helping black business at a time when African Americans did not have access to capital. The 9 founders were visionary men, led by Merrick, and were determined to lift up themselves and the black community in which they lived. In the 1920s, Mechanics and Farmers saved over 500 African American farms and homes when its loan department provided $200,000 in individual loans. The bank was one of about a dozen African American banks to survive the Great Depression and holds the distinction of being the first lending institution in North Carolina to receive a certificate of authority from the Federal Housing Administration in 1935. After a tour of Durham in 1912, W.E.B. Du Bois, author, activist, and founder of the Niagara Movement and the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, published an article about his visit titled "The Upbuilding of Black Durham, the Success of the Negro, and Their Value to a Tolerant and Helpful Southern City." His observations in this piece were key to Durham's black community receiving titles such as Black Wall Street and the capital of the black middle class. The deeds of Merrick and others are referenced in the article by Du Bois. The Bull City Drug Company was part of the consortium at Parish Street, and yet another business that Merrick played a hand in forming. Along with the Colored Library, the Merrick Moore Spalding Real Estate Company, and the Durham Textile Mill. Sadly, John Merrick would die August 6, 1919, after a long illness, and the entire nation mourned his passing. The Dallas Express, Dallas, Texas, dated Saturday, August 30th, 1919. Merrick was a self-made man whose life was a good example to the members of his race. At the launching of the SS John Merrick on July 11, 1943, the 60th governor of North Carolina, Joseph Melville Broughton, said this: "In the launching of this ship, bearing the honored name John Merrick, it is fervently hoped that the life of this great man may be brought freshly to the minds of both races in North Carolina, and indeed in America, In the light of his wholesome philosophy and successful career, we may find a path of harmony, success, victory, and peace through mutual respect and honest cooperation. When I first began this project, I thought how cool it would be if I could find a living relative of John Merrick. And guess what? I did. And she joins us from Duke Forest. Her name is Miss Constance Eileen Watts Welch. And she is the chair of the Colored Library in Durham, whose goal is the preservation of local stories, family histories, and so forth. Without further ado, Miss Watts Welch, thank you for joining us.
Hello, it's so nice to be here. I am Eileen Watts Welch. I live in Durham, North Carolina, and I am great-granddaughter of John Merrick, who you're celebrating today. I wanted to come, and I'm so pleased to know about this process, this event that you are holding. So just to be clear, my mother's parents were the children of John Merrick, that was her father's dad, and Aaron McDuffie Moore, who was her mother's dad. And those two gentlemen are gentlemen that you know about. Today you're celebrating John Merrick. And Aaron McDuffie Moore was his friend for life. And they did a lot of things in Durham to encourage a better life for African Americans. Aaron McDuffie Moore has a book, a biography out about Aaron McDuffie Moore now that we recently published. It came out last May. It's his life, a definitive biography of him that talks about including his work with John Merrick and Charles Clinton Spaulding. Ultimately, the work that they did to found North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance Company. You might want to find out more about that book, and I'm sure we will post somewhere the information on my website about that. So in my life now, I'm running a nonprofit that we're doing historical research and publishing information because we don't want that material to get lost. My childhood years were spent in Durham. I was at the foot of my grandmother until I was about 9 years old. We lived with her and Ed in their home because my father was just establishing his surgical practice in Durham at that time. So until like from 1950 to 1954, we lived in her home, their home, and I heard all the stories from her firsthand that I can tell, and from my granddaddy about his father. So these are the stories that I don't want to get lost. And I know if they're not written and not put in media form, that the next generations will not have advantage of understanding what it took to live during those times and how to make a difference in people's lives. So the early life of John Merrick is something that I'm immediately interested in. I have very little research about that. I want to thank Stan Best for inviting me and for coming to visit and telling me about all the information he's gathered about John Merrick. Much of this is information that we don't have. I want to tell you about a book that we've published in May of 2020. This book was released. The title is Aaron McDuffie Moore, African American physician, educator, and founder of Durham's Black Wall Street. There's a lot of information in there about the person you're celebrating today, John Merrick. It took us 6 years to gather all of the information about Aaron McDuffie Moore's early life and his work in Durham, and the various organizations he founded that actually helped the African American community during those times. In particular, he founded the Durham Colored Library, Inc., which is the organization through which we published this book and have a mission of lifting up stories of African American figures, both current and historical, to create a more comprehensive picture of the American experience. The website is durhamcl.org, so www.durham, DURHAMCL, as in colored library.org. There you can find out ways to order the book, see videos of us talking about the book, and understand more of the projects that we have on the horizon.